Elena's hands were still damp from scrubbing the kitchen counters when her phone rang. She wiped them quickly on her apron and answered, already knowing what was coming. "I'm so sorry, Elena. My daughter came down with a fever. I can't watch Daniel today." Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It was Thursday, which meant the Ashford mansion needed a deep clean before the weekend charity event. Mrs. Victoria Ashford didn't accept excuses, and Elena couldn't afford to lose this job. She'd been cleaning the Billionaire's home for 3 years now, and the pay was better than anything else she could find. "It's okay. Maria, I hope she feels better soon," Elena said softly before hanging up. She looked across their small apartment where her 17-year-old son sat at their tiny kitchen table doing homework. Daniel glanced up, his dark eyes already understanding the situation. He'd always been like that, able to read her mind without a single word being spoken. "I have to come with you today, don't I?" he asked. "I'm sorry, honey. I know you wanted to practice this afternoon." Daniel shrugged and started packing his books. "It's fine, Mom. I can study there." An hour later, they pulled up to the Ashford estate in Elena's old sedan. The mansion loomed before them, all white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges. Daniel had been here a few times before, always staying quiet in the kitchen while his mother worked. He knew the rules: don't touch anything, don't make noise, and definitely don't bother Mrs. Ashford. Victoria Ashford was in the main hall when they entered, barking orders at 3 different people through her phone. She was dressed in an expensive cream suit, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She barely glanced at Elena and Daniel as they slipped past her toward the service entrance. "Elena, the chandelier in the ballroom needs special attention today. We're having important guests tomorrow," Victoria called out without looking up from her phone. "Yes, Mrs. Ashford." Daniel settled into a small sitting room near the kitchen with his textbooks, but after an hour of trying to focus on calculus, his attention kept drifting. He could hear his mother moving through the house, the sounds of cleaning mixing with Victoria's, constant phone conversations about flower arrangements and seating charts. Then Daniel heard something else, shouting. He got up quietly and moved closer to the sound. "What do you mean you can't make it?"
"The event is tomorrow evening."
Victoria's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I specifically hired you 3 months ago. People are expecting live piano music during cocktail hour." There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. "I don't care about your family emergency. This is unacceptable. Completely unprofessional." Daniel winced. He'd never liked Mrs. Ashford, but this was cold even for her. Victoria ended the call and immediately made another. Daniel could hear her going through a list of pianists, each one either unavailable or too expensive for what she wanted to pay. Her voice grew more frustrated with each call. Daniel wandered back toward the sitting room, but something pulled him in a different direction. He'd passed by the music room dozens of times, but never actually gone inside. Today the door was open. The piano sat in the center of the room like a sleeping giant. It was a Steinway, black and glossy, probably worth more than every car on his street combined. Daniel had only ever played uprights at the community center, and his broken electric keyboard at home. He'd never even touched a piano like this. His fingers itched just looking at it. He knew he shouldn't. Mrs. Ashford had made it clear that he was only tolerated in her home because his mother was an excellent cleaner. But the piano seemed to call to him, and before he could stop himself, Daniel was sitting on the bench. He didn't open the lid or press any keys. He just sat there, his hands hovering over the keyboard, imagining what it would feel like to play an instrument like this. "What are you doing?" Daniel jumped and turned to find Victoria Ashford standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression annoyed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford. I wasn't going to touch it. I was just looking." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. "Do you play?" Daniel hesitated. "A little. A little." Victoria repeated the words like they tasted bitter. She pulled out her phone and checked the time, then looked back at Daniel. Something shifted in her expression, though it wasn't exactly kind. It was more like she'd just spotted a tool she could use. "My pianist canceled for tomorrow's event. I need someone to play background music during cocktail hour. Nothing fancy, just something pleasant that won't distract from conversations. Can you do that?" Daniel's heart raced. Play a Steinway? At an actual event? But the way she was looking at him like he was just another problem to solve made something in his chest tighten. "I suppose so, yes." "Good. Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. Wear something presentable, dark colors. I'll pay you $50. $50. For what would probably be 2 hours of playing. Daniel had friends who made more than that working a single shift at the movie theater. Mrs. Ashford, I don't think... Elena had appeared in the hallway behind her employer, her face pale. She'd obviously heard everything. It's fine, Mom, Daniel said quickly. He could see the worry in her eyes, but he could also see something else. Opportunity. His mother had sacrificed everything to raise him alone, working 2 jobs most of his life. If he could help, even a little he would. Victoria nodded briskly. Settled then. Elena, please make sure the silver in the dining room is polished. She turned and walked away, already on another phone call. When she was gone, Elena rushed to her son. Daniel, you don't have to do this. The way she spoke to you like you're just like I'm the help. Daniel smiled sadly. Mom, I am the help. We both are. But it's okay. I'll get to play a real piano. A Steinway. Do you know how rare that is for someone like me? Elena cupped his face in her work-worn hands. You're worth so much more than $50, baby. You know that, right? I know, Mom, but right now $50 helps. And who knows? He looked back at the piano. Maybe something good will come from this. Elena hugged him tight, wishing she could give him everything he deserved. A real piano of his own. Proper lessons from a master teacher. A future that didn't involve scraping by and accepting whatever scraps people like Victoria Ashford tossed their way. But all she could give him was love and support. So she squeezed him once more and whispered, Play beautifully tomorrow. Show her what real talent looks like. Daniel nodded, not knowing that in less than 24 hours those words would prove more prophetic than either of them could imagine. The next evening would change everything, starting with a dismissive billionaire who thought she was simply hiring background music, not witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. Daniel's hands wouldn't stop shaking as he sat in the car outside the Ashford mansion. His mother had ironed his one good button-down shirt 3 times that morning, making sure every crease was perfect. He wore the dark slacks he'd bought for his cousin's wedding last year, already a bit short at the ankles but still presentable. You're going to be amazing, Elena said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Just remember, you're not doing this for her. You're doing this for you. Daniel nodded, though his stomach was doing flips. He'd practiced on his keyboard until 2 in the morning, running through every piece he knew. But a cheap electric keyboard was nothing like a real Steinway. What if he messed up? What if his hands froze? They walked to the service entrance as usual, but a stern-looking woman in a black suit stopped them. You must be the piano player. Mrs. Ashford wants you to enter through the main entrance. Guests are already arriving. Elena gave Daniel's shoulder one last encouraging pat before heading to help in the kitchen. Daniel followed the woman through the front door, suddenly very aware of how fancy everything looked. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. The marble floors were so polished he could see his reflection. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns glided past him like he was invisible. The music room had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface and the Steinway's lid was raised, ready. Victoria appeared beside him so suddenly he flinched. You're here. Good. Play something light and pleasant. Mozart, maybe some Chopin. Nothing dramatic or attention-grabbing. This is background music, understand? People need to be able to talk over it. She looked him up and down, her lips pressed thin. Try not to draw attention to yourself. Then she was gone, swept back into the crowd of arriving guests. Daniel sat at the bench and took a deep breath. His fingers touched the keys and immediately he felt the difference. The action was smooth, responsive. Each note sang out pure and clear. This was what a real piano felt like. He started with Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 16, something simple and familiar. His nervousness began to fade as he settled into the music. Around him, guests mingled and chatted, holding champagne flutes and laughing at jokes he couldn't hear. Nobody looked his way. He was exactly what Victoria wanted. Invisible. For the first 20 minutes, Daniel played it safe. Pleasant melodies that floated through the air without demanding attention. But then something shifted inside him. His fingers moved to a piece he taught himself last year, one of Chopin's nocturnes. The melody was more emotional, more personal. An older man near the piano paused mid-conversation. His companion kept talking, but the man wasn't listening anymore. He was listening to Daniel. Daniel didn't notice. He was lost in the music now, feeling every note in his chest. He'd spent 3 years watching his mother come home exhausted from cleaning houses. 3 years working at the grocery store after school instead of taking the scholarship to the music academy. 3 years wondering if he'd ever get a real chance to show what he could do. All of that feeling poured into the piano. He transitioned into Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece he'd learned from a scratchy YouTube video, practicing the complex runs over and over on his broken keyboard until his fingers ached. On this Steinway, the music exploded into life. Dark and powerful and achingly beautiful. More conversations stopped. Heads turned. Victoria, across the room discussing donation amounts with a group of wealthy couples, heard the change in music. She frowned and looked toward the piano, probably ready to tell Daniel to tone it down, but the expressions on her guests' faces stopped her. They weren't just listening. They were mesmerized. Daniel's hands flew across the keys, hitting every note with precision and passion. The technical difficulty of the piece was clear to anyone who knew music, but it was the emotion behind it that reached everyone else. You didn't need to understand music theory to feel what Daniel was expressing. Pain, hope, determination. Years of dreams deferred but not forgotten. A woman in a silver dress pressed her hand to her chest, tears forming in her eyes. The older man who'd first stopped to listen now stood directly beside the piano, watching Daniel's hands with an expression of pure wonder. When the piece ended, there was a moment of complete silence. Daniel's hands hovered over the keys, his heart pounding. Had he done something wrong? He'd gotten carried away, played exactly the kind of music Victoria told him not to play. Then the applause started. It began with the older man, his clapping sharp and enthusiastic. Others joined in, and soon the entire room was applauding. Not the polite golf clap you'd give background music, but real appreciation. Some guests were wiping their eyes. Daniel looked up, stunned. He'd never played for more than his mother and the handful of people at the community center. This was different. These people understood what they'd just heard. Victoria appeared at his side, her face a carefully controlled mask. She smiled, but Daniel could see the tightness around her eyes. Well, that was certainly more than expected. The older man approached them, his hand extended toward Daniel. Young man, that was extraordinary. Where did you study? Daniel stood awkwardly, shaking the man's hand. I didn't, sir. I'm self-taught. Self-taught? The man looked genuinely shocked. Impossible. The technique alone requires years of proper instruction. I learned from videos and library books mostly. And practice. What's your name? Daniel. Daniel Martinez. The man turned to Victoria. Victoria, you didn't mention you were mentoring such a talented young musician. This is exactly the kind of thing your foundation should be supporting. Victoria's smile became even more strained. Yes, well, we're always looking to support promising young talent. Daniel noticed she didn't correct the man's assumption. She was letting him think this mentorship was intentional, that she'd discovered Daniel's talent and was helping him. The truth, that she'd hired him yesterday for $50 to play forgettable background music, remained unspoken. More guests crowded around. They asked questions, offered compliments, and shared stories about their own children's music lessons. Daniel answered politely, but he kept glancing at Victoria. She stood slightly apart, accepting congratulations from guests who praised her for finding such a talented protege. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway, her hands clasped together. Pride and worry warred on her face. She'd heard every note her son played, felt every emotion he'd poured into the music. But she also saw how the wealthy guests crowded around him, how Victoria basked in reflected glory. And she knew this moment was both a blessing and a danger. The older man pulled out his business card and handed it to Daniel. I'm Raymond Chen. I'm on the board at Juilliard. We should talk about your future, young man. Real talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away. Daniel took the card with trembling hands, reading the name over and over. Juilliard. The dream he'd given up 3 years ago was suddenly being handed back to him. But as he looked up and saw Victoria watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, Daniel realized something important. This moment, this opportunity, it had come at a price. Victoria had gotten exactly what she wanted. Not background music, but a story that made her look generous and visionary. The question was, what would she expect in return? The night was just beginning, and Daniel had no idea that the real performance hadn't even started yet. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Daniel. Between playing more pieces, he found himself surrounded by guests who wanted to know everything about him. Where had he performed before? Who was his teacher? What competitions had he won? Each question felt like a tiny knife. Nowhere, no one, none. Raymond Chen stayed close, genuinely interested in Daniel's story. During a break, he pulled Daniel aside to one of the quieter corners of the mansion. "Tell me honestly," Raymond said, his voice kind but serious. "How did you really learn to play like that?" Daniel hesitated. Part of him wanted to make up something impressive, something that would fit better in this world of wealth and privilege. But lying had never come easy to him. "My mom used to clean houses for a family that had a piano. When I was 8, they let me try it while she worked. I fell in love with it immediately." Daniel smiled at the memory. "After that family moved away, I saved up for a year to buy a used keyboard at a garage sale. It was missing some keys and the speakers were blown, but it worked enough to practice." Raymond listened intently, not interrupting. "I borrowed books from the library. Music theory, piano technique, composer biographies, anything I could find. Then I discovered YouTube videos of performances and tutorials. I'd watch them over and over, slowing them down to see exactly how the pianists moved their fingers." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I practiced every day. On my lunch breaks at school, I'd use the piano in the music room. The teacher there, Mrs. Lopez, she let me come in whenever I wanted." "What about formal training? Lessons?" "There was a scholarship 3 years ago. A full ride to the city's Performing Arts Academy." Daniel's voice got quieter. "I won it. Beat out 60 other kids, but you didn't go. My mom's hours got cut at her main job. We needed money for rent, for food. I got a job at the grocery store instead, worked after school and weekends." He shrugged, trying to make it sound like it didn't matter, even though it still hurt to think about. "The scholarship couldn't wait a year. They gave it to someone else." Raymond was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Do you still work at the grocery store?" "Yes, sir. Monday through Friday after school, and Saturdays." "And when do you practice?" "Late at night, mostly. After homework and work. On my keyboard with headphones so I don't wake the neighbors." Raymond shook his head slowly, and Daniel couldn't tell if it was admiration or sadness on his face. "Maybe both. Daniel, what you did tonight? That level of playing? Most students at Juilliard can't do that, and they've had private instruction since they were 5 years old. The fact that you taught yourself," he trailed off, "it's remarkable, truly remarkable." Before Daniel could respond, he heard Victoria's voice behind them. She'd been watching from across the room, and something about seeing Raymond deep in conversation with Daniel had drawn her over. "Raymond, I hope Daniel isn't boring you with too much talk." Her smile was bright but brittle. "On the contrary, Victoria. I was just learning about Daniel's journey. It's quite inspiring." Raymond turned to face her fully. "I have to say, I'm impressed with your foundation's work. Finding talent in unexpected places, supporting students who might otherwise never get a chance. This is exactly what arts education needs more of." Victoria's smile flickered. "Yes, well, we try our best. How long have you been working with Daniel?" The question hung in the air. Daniel watched Victoria's face, curious what she would say. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the quick weighing of options. "We've been aware of his talent for some time," she said carefully. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Daniel felt something twist in his stomach. Raymond nodded enthusiastically. "I'd love to discuss this further. Perhaps we could arrange for Daniel to visit Juilliard, see our facilities. With your foundation's support and my recommendation, I think we could make a very strong case for admission and a full scholarship." "That sounds wonderful," Victoria said. "We should definitely explore that." A woman in an elegant black dress approached, champagne flute in hand. "Victoria, you must tell us more about your protege. Helen and I were just saying that this is what real philanthropy looks like. Not just writing checks, but actually discovering and nurturing raw talent." Others gathered around, all wanting to know about Victoria's vision, her foundation's mission, how she'd found Daniel. With each question, Victoria's version of events became more polished. She spoke about identifying potential in underserved communities and believing in talent regardless of circumstances. Daniel stood there, listening to her take credit for something she'd had nothing to do with. Just yesterday, she'd offered him $50 to play forgettable background music. She'd looked at him like he was barely worth noticing. Now she was acting like she'd been his champion all along. His mother appeared at the edge of the crowd, still in her cleaning clothes. She'd been working the whole evening while Daniel played, making sure the kitchen ran smoothly, that glasses were washed, that everything was perfect. Elena's eyes met Daniel's, and he saw that she'd heard everything too. The party wound down around 11. Guests departed with hugs and promises to stay involved with Victoria's foundation. Several pressed business cards into Daniel's hands, telling him to reach out if he needed anything. When the last guest had left, Victoria found Daniel and Elena in the kitchen where they'd been waiting. The warmth she'd shown in front of her guests had evaporated. That was quite a performance, she said, and Daniel couldn't tell if she meant the piano playing or the whole evening. Thank you for the opportunity, Mrs. Ashford, Elena said quietly. Victoria pulled an envelope from her purse and handed it to Daniel. $50 as agreed. Daniel took it, the envelope feeling heavier than it should. $50. For a performance that had moved a room full of wealthy people to tears. For playing that had caught the attention of a Juilliard board member. For giving Victoria Ashford a story she could use to make herself look generous. There will be other events, Victoria continued. Opportunities for you to play again. My foundation will, of course, want to be involved in your future endeavors. We'll need to coordinate on how to present this story to the press. It's important that we control the narrative properly. There it was. The real price, Mrs. Ashford, Daniel said slowly. What exactly do you mean by control the narrative? Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Simply that we'll want to position this correctly. My foundation discovering you, nurturing your talent, providing opportunities. It's a feel-good story that benefits everyone. But that's not what happened. The words came out before Daniel could stop them. Elena touched his arm, a gentle warning, but he continued. You hired me yesterday to play background music for $50. You told me not to draw attention to myself. You didn't know I could play like this. You didn't discover anything. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Victoria's expression hardened. I gave you an opportunity that you wouldn't have had otherwise, she said coldly. Access to my piano, to my guests, to people like Raymond Chen. Don't forget where you'd be without that. Working at a grocery store and practicing on a broken keyboard, Daniel said. But at least I'd be honest about it. Victoria's face flushed. You have no idea how the real world works, young man. Raymond Chen's offer, Juilliard. All of it depends on support from people like me. People with connections and resources. If you want that future, you'll need to be smart about how you get there. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear Daniel could see in her eyes. Mrs. Ashford, my son is grateful for what happened tonight, but we can't pretend it was something it wasn't. Victoria looked between them, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression. It wasn't quite anger, but close to it. I see. Well then, I suppose we all need to think carefully about what we want moving forward. She left without another word. Daniel and his mother stood in the empty kitchen. The $50 envelope sat on the counter between them, somehow looking even smaller than before. Did I just ruin everything? Daniel whispered. Elena pulled him into a hug. No, baby. You told the truth. That's never the wrong thing to do. But as they drove home through the dark streets, both of them wondered if the truth was a luxury they could actually afford. 3 days passed with no word from anyone. Daniel went to school, worked his shifts at the grocery store, and practiced on his keyboard late into the night. He tried not to think about what he might have thrown away in Victoria Ashford's kitchen, but it was hard not to wonder. Raymond Chen's business card sat on his dresser. Daniel must have picked it up 100 times, thinking about calling, but always putting it back down. What would he even say? Would Raymond still be interested once he knew Daniel had essentially told Victoria Ashford to take her story and leave? On Monday afternoon, while Daniel was stocking shelves at the grocery store, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello? Daniel Martinez. This is Raymond Chen. We met at Victoria Ashford's event. Daniel's heart jumped into his throat. He quickly walked toward the back of the store where it was quieter. Yes, sir. I remember. I wanted to follow up with you about Juilliard. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Of course. Good. First, I want you to know that I've been thinking about your performance all weekend. That kind of raw talent is rare, Daniel. Very rare. Raymond paused. I also heard about what happened after the party. In the kitchen, Daniel's stomach dropped. Oh, Victoria called me the next morning. She was quite upset. Told me you were ungrateful and difficult to work with. Raymond's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. She suggested I reconsider my interest in helping you. This was it. The door closing. Daniel had known it was coming, but it still hurt to hear. I understand, sir. Thank you for taking the time to— I'm not finished, Raymond interrupted gently. After Victoria called, I did something I probably should have done from the beginning. I asked around about you, called the Performing Arts Academy that offered you that scholarship 3 years ago, spoke with your music teacher at school, Mrs. Lopez. Daniel didn't know what to say. They all told me the same thing. You're talented, yes, but more than that, you're honest. You work harder than anyone they've ever met, and you turned down that scholarship not because you didn't want it, but because your family needed you. Raymond's voice grew warmer. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Sir, I didn't mean to cause problems with Mrs. Ashford. I just couldn't lie about what really happened. That's not a flaw, Daniel. That's integrity. Raymond sighed. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen a lot of talented kids come through, and I've learned that talent alone isn't enough. Character matters. How you handle success, how you treat people, whether you stay true to yourself when the pressure is on. Those things matter just as much as how well you play. Daniel leaned against the wall, hardly believing what he was hearing. So here's what I'd like to propose. Raymond continued. Come visit Juilliard next week. Meet with the admissions team. Play for them. Let's see if we can make this happen. But what about Mrs. Ashford? Her foundation? You don't need her foundation, Daniel. Yes, it would have made things easier, having that kind of backing. But there are other ways. Scholarships, grants, work-study programs. It won't be easy, but nothing about your journey has been easy so far, has it? Daniel felt tears prickling his eyes. No, sir. Then we'll figure it out together, one step at a time. Are you interested? Yes, absolutely yes. They talked for another 10 minutes, Raymond explaining the application process and what Daniel needed to prepare. When they hung up, Daniel stood in the back room of the grocery store, his hands shaking, barely able to process what had just happened. But his relief was short-lived. That evening, Victoria Ashford called Elena directly. Daniel was in his room when his mother answered, but he could hear her side of the conversation through the thin walls of their apartment. Yes, Mrs. Ashford, I understand. But I don't think— Mrs. Ashford, please. Daniel came out of his room to find his mother sitting at their small kitchen table, her phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. I appreciate everything, but— Yes, I understand. Thank you for letting me know. She ended the call and just sat there staring at nothing. Mom, what happened? Elena wiped her eyes and tried to smile, but it didn't reach her face. Mrs. Ashford let me go. Said she no longer needs my services. The words hit Daniel like a punch. What? No, this is because of me. Because of what I said. She didn't say that exactly. She said she was making some changes, bringing in a new cleaning company. Elena's voice was hollow. But yes, I think we both know why. Daniel sank into the chair beside her. His mother had worked for Victoria Ashford for 3 years. That job paid better than any of her other clients. They'd been counting on that money. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have just kept my mouth shut. I should have— Don't. Elena grabbed his hands, her grip tight. Don't you dare apologize for telling the truth. This is not your fault. This is her showing us exactly who she is. But we need that money. How are we going to— We'll figure it out. We always do. Elena squeezed his hands once more before letting go. I can pick up more hours with my other clients. Maybe find some new ones. It'll be okay, but Daniel could see it wouldn't be okay. Not easily. His mother was already working herself to exhaustion. Losing Victoria's income would mean cutting back on everything. And his job at the grocery store wouldn't be enough to make up the difference. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that had led to this moment. Maybe Raymond was right about integrity mattering, but right now, integrity felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. His phone lit up with a text message at almost midnight. Unknown number again. Daniel, this is Victoria Ashford. I think we need to talk. I have a proposal that might interest you. He stared at the message for a long time before typing back. What kind of proposal? The response came quickly. I'm hosting another event this weekend. A bigger one. National press will be there. I'd like you to perform again. Daniel's fingers hovered over the keyboard. And in exchange? In exchange, I'll reinstate your mother's position. Plus, I'll personally fund your education at Juilliard. Full tuition, room and board, everything you need. All you have to do is let me announce it at the event. You'll be the face of the Ashford Foundation's new initiative to support underprivileged youth in the arts. There it was. The solution to everything. His mother's job back, Juilliard fully funded, his dreams handed to him on a silver platter. There are conditions, Victoria's next message read. You'll credit the foundation in all interviews. Appear at our events when requested. And we'll tell the story my way. That I discovered your talent and have been mentoring you. Think of it as a partnership. Everyone wins. Daniel read the messages over and over. In the next room, he could hear his mother's quiet crying, the sound she tried to hide but never quite could. She'd sacrificed everything for him, worked herself to the bone, and now she'd lost a major job because he'd been too proud to play along. Another message came through. You have until Friday to decide. After that, the offer expires. Think carefully, Daniel. This is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. Daniel set his phone down and covered his face with his hands. Raymond had called his honesty integrity. But what good was integrity if it meant his mother suffered? What good was telling the truth if it meant his dreams stayed forever out of reach? The Juilliard visit was next week. He could go, take his chances with scholarships and grants like Raymond suggested. It would be hard, uncertain, maybe impossible. Or he could accept Victoria's offer. Guarantee his future. Get his mother's job back. All he had to do was sell a version of his story that wasn't quite true. By morning, Daniel still hadn't decided. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever choice he made would define not just his future, but who he was going to be. And that weight felt heavier than any piano he'd ever played. Friday morning came too quickly. Daniel had spent the entire week going back and forth, weighing his options until his head hurt. Every time he leaned toward accepting Victoria's offer, he'd remember the look on her face when she'd tried to rewrite his story. Every time he considered turning it down, he'd see his mother's tired eyes and feel the weight of her sacrifices. He hadn't told Elena about Victoria's proposal. How could he? His mother would tell him to refuse it immediately, even though it meant giving up everything they needed. That was who she was. Someone who'd rather struggle honestly than live comfortably on a lie. Thursday night, Daniel had finally texted Victoria a single word. Yes. Her response had been immediate, professional, triumphant. Excellent choice. The event is Saturday evening at 6. I'll send a car for you and your mother. Wear something formal. We'll discuss talking points beforehand. Now it was Saturday and Daniel stood in front of the mirror in a suit that Victoria had sent over. Expensive, perfectly fitted, nothing like anything he'd ever owned. He looked like someone else. Maybe that was the point. Elena adjusted his tie, her hands gentle. You look so handsome, baby. So grown up, she didn't know what tonight really meant. She thought this was just another performance, another chance to play. Daniel hadn't been able to find the words to explain the deal he'd made. The car Victoria sent was ridiculous. A black luxury sedan that looked completely out of place in their neighborhood. Neighbors stared as Daniel and Elena climbed in. At the Ashford mansion, everything was even more elaborate than before. A red carpet led to the entrance. Photographers waited outside. Through the windows, Daniel could see at least twice as many guests as last time, all dressed in formal wear that probably cost more than his mother earned in 6 months. Victoria met them at a side entrance, away from the crowds. She looked Daniel over and nodded approvingly. Good. You look the part. Then she turned to Elena. Mrs. Martinez, there's a separate area for staff. You'll be more comfortable there. Something flickered across Elena's face. I'd like to watch my son perform if that's possible. Of course, but from the designated area. This is a formal event. Victoria's tone left no room for argument. After Elena was led away, Victoria guided Daniel to a quiet study. She closed the door and pulled out a small stack of index cards. I've prepared some talking points for you. Simple, easy to remember. When people ask how we met, you say I visited your school as part of a foundation outreach program. When they ask about your training, you mention that I've been providing private instruction and resources for the past 6 months. 6 months. Daniel's voice came out weak. It sounds better than 1 week. More substantial. Victoria handed him the cards. Memorize these. When I introduce you tonight, I'll announce the full scholarship to Juilliard. The press will want interviews. Just stick to the talking points and everything will go smoothly. Daniel looked down at the cards. Each one contained a carefully crafted lie, a piece of the story Victoria wanted to tell. His fingers trembled slightly. "Mrs. Ashford, you need to get ready. The event starts in 20 minutes. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Daniel, I know this feels complicated, but this is how the world works. Sometimes we have to adjust the truth to create the right narrative. It doesn't hurt anyone, and it helps everyone. Your future is secure. Your mother gets her job back, and my foundation gets to make a real difference. That's what matters." She left before he could respond. Daniel stood alone in the study, the index cards feeling like weights in his hands. Through the window, he could see guests arriving, hear the buzz of conversation and laughter. Somewhere in this massive house, his mother was being kept separate, away from the wealthy people who would soon hear a story about her son that wasn't true. He thought about Raymond Chen's words. Character matters. How you handle success, how you treat people, whether you stay true to yourself when the pressure is on. He thought about all those nights practicing on his broken keyboard, dreaming of moments like this. He'd imagined success 1,000 different ways, but never like this, never built on a foundation of lies. Daniel looked at the cards one more time, then tore them in half. The main ballroom fell silent when Victoria took the microphone. She looked radiant, confident, every inch the philanthropist about to change a young man's life. "Thank you all for being here tonight. As many of you know, the Ashford Foundation is committed to discovering and nurturing talent in our community, particularly among those who might not otherwise have opportunities." She smiled warmly. "Tonight, I'm thrilled to introduce you to someone very special, a young pianist whose raw talent and dedication represent everything our foundation stands for. Please welcome Daniel Martinez." The applause was deafening as Daniel walked to the piano. He could see Raymond Chen in the crowd smiling encouragingly. He could see reporters with cameras ready. He could see Victoria, standing to the side, waiting for him to play his part in her carefully choreographed story. And near the back, in a corner where she'd been allowed to stand, he saw his mother. Elena's eyes met his, and in that moment, Daniel knew what he had to do. He sat at the piano but didn't touch the keys. Instead, he turned to face the audience. "Before I play, I need to say something." His voice shook, but he pushed forward. "Mrs. Ashford told you a story about how we met, about how her foundation has been supporting me. But that's not what happened." The room went completely still. He could see Victoria's face draining of color. "The truth is, I met Mrs. Ashford 1 week ago. My mother cleans houses, including this one. When Mrs. Ashford's pianist canceled, she asked me to play background music for $50. She didn't know I could play well. She didn't discover my talent. She just needed someone to fill a gap." Someone in the crowd gasped. Reporters' cameras started flashing. "I played that night and people heard me. One person in particular, Mr. Raymond Chen, offered to help me apply to Juilliard. That was real. That was genuine." Daniel's hands gripped the edge of the piano bench. "Mrs. Ashford offered me a full scholarship to Juilliard if I would tell a different story. If I would let her take credit for discovering me, for supporting me all along. And I almost did it because my family needs the money and I need the opportunity." Victoria stepped forward. "Daniel, I think we should, but I can't." Daniel's voice grew stronger. "I can't build my future on a lie. I can't let people think I'm something I'm not, that I got here through advantages I never had. My mother worked 3 jobs to raise me. I taught myself piano from library books and YouTube videos. I practice on a broken keyboard after working shifts at a grocery store. That's my real story, and I'm not ashamed of it." The silence in the room was absolute. "I know this probably means I just gave up my chance at Juilliard. I know my mom just lost a job she really needed because I couldn't keep my mouth shut the first time. I know I should have been smart and played along." Daniel stood up, his legs shaky. "But I'd rather struggle with the truth than succeed with a lie. If anyone here wants to help me because of my talent and who I really am, I'd be grateful, but I won't pretend to be someone else to make it happen." He walked away from the piano, through the stunned crowd, toward his mother. Elena was crying, but she pulled him into a fierce hug. "Let's go home, baby," she whispered. They were halfway to the door when Raymond Chen's voice rang out. "Wait." Daniel and Elena turned. Raymond was walking toward them, and to Daniel's shock, he was clapping. Slowly, deliberately. In 30 years of working in music education, I have never seen anything like that. Raymond reached them and put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Young man, You just demonstrated something far more valuable than perfect pitch or flawless technique. You showed us integrity. Other people began clapping too. Not everyone. Victoria stood frozen, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Some of her wealthy friends looked uncomfortable, unsure how to react. But others, maybe a third of the room, were applauding. A woman in an elegant blue dress stepped forward. I'm Patricia Holloway. I run a charitable trust that funds arts education. She pulled out her business card. We'd like to talk to you about support. Real support with no strings attached. Another man approached. I'm with the City Arts Council. We have emergency grants for exactly situations like yours. More people came forward. Not everyone, and not nearly as much money as Victoria had offered. But they were real offers, honest ones, from people who'd seen something in Daniel worth supporting. Raymond smiled. I meant what I said about Juilliard. That offer stands. We'll figure out the funding together. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. Daniel could barely speak. Thank you. All of you, thank you. As they left the mansion for the last time, Elena squeezed his hand. You know we're going to struggle, right? Money's going to be really tight. I know, Mom. And you're okay with that? Daniel thought about the weight that had lifted from his chest the moment he'd told the truth. Yeah, I'm okay with that. 6 months later, Daniel stood on the stage at Juilliard's orientation for new students. He'd gotten in through a combination of small scholarships, grants, and a work-study program that meant he'd be doing maintenance work on campus. It wasn't glamorous and it wouldn't be easy, but it was real. In the audience, Elena sat beaming with pride. Beside her was Raymond Chen, who'd become a mentor and friend. And behind them, in one of the back rows where Daniel hadn't expected to see her, sat Victoria Ashford. She'd reached out 2 months after that disastrous evening. No apologies exactly, but an acknowledgement that she'd been wrong. She'd started funding music programs in public schools, quietly, without press releases or credit. She'd realized, she told Daniel in a brief email, that real philanthropy wasn't about building her reputation. It was about actually helping people. Daniel didn't know if Victoria's change of heart would last. People didn't usually transform overnight, but the fact that she'd shown up today, sitting quietly in the back without seeking attention, suggested that maybe she was trying. As Daniel unpacked his things in his dorm room that evening, he pulled out his old broken keyboard. He'd brought it with him, even though he'd have access to world-class pianos now. It reminded him of where he'd come from, of all those late nights practicing with headphones on, dreaming of moments like this. His roommate, a kid from a wealthy family who'd been playing since age 4, looked at the keyboard skeptically. Why'd you bring that old thing? Daniel ran his fingers over the worn keys, to remember that sometimes the hardest path is the right one, and that who you are matters more than what you have. His roommate didn't seem to understand, but that was okay. Daniel understood. And somewhere in their small apartment across town, his mother understood too. That was enough. The future was uncertain. There would be struggles ahead, moments of doubt, times when he'd wonder if he'd made the right choice. But when Daniel sat at the piano that first day of classes and played for his new instructors, he played without shame, without pretense, and without lies. He played as himself. And that made all the difference.